She walked onto the firing line to the sound of laughter, but one shot was all it took to silence them forever. What started as humiliation turned into a legend. The rebirth of Wraith 6, a ghost soldier no one was supposed to remember. They laughed. It started as a ripple, low, easy, the sort of laugh that wants company, and then it swelled until the whole range joined in. I felt it more than heard it, a pressure against my ribs, like a weather front rolling over a landscape. They pointed, nudged each other, mouthed things that tasted like bet and boredom. Little Miss Steady, they called me. Paper Girl. Liability. I kept my hands on the wood because that was what I'd learned to do first. Steady the rifle, cradle it like a sleeping thing, treat it with the gentleness of someone who knew what it could take. The M110 felt familiar in my palms, not heavy but balanced, like a promise. The wind stitched little dramas through the grasses. I closed my eyes for one measured breath and listened. They expected panic. That's what people expect when someone who doesn't fit their idea of a shooter shoulders a gun. Maybe it's the wrong face. Maybe it's the wrong hands. Maybe it's the wrong gender, the wrong quiet. They like stories where the script is tidy, nervous recruit, flubbed round, ritual humiliation, lesson learned in front of the crowd. I learned long ago that life refuses neat scripts. Winds shifting, I said. No one listened. The sergeant barked the count. My finger found the trigger like it belonged there. I didn't think in whole sentences after that. The world outside my cheekbone narrowed to the span of the barrel, the soft climb of the reticle, a little line of horizon that mattered more than any name called from the berm. The first shot left like a struck bell, clean, honest, not loud for those who'd been around guns long enough, but carried with a definite certainty. It kissed the target at the exact millimeter I had planned in the fraction of a breath between holding and release. Somewhere in the middle of the line, the laughter sputtered and broke, then stopped altogether. Silence arrived as if someone had snapped their fingers, and the day obeyed. For a suspended second, nobody moved. The recruits who had been clowning looked at me the way people look at a map after they realize they've been walking the wrong way for hours. The instructors, men whose careers had been welded to pride and protocol, went still, their expressions folding into something like calculation. I felt my heartbeat, singular and steady, the old rhythm that does not rush when it knows what it's doing. Good grouping, one of the older marksmen said finally, voice low enough that he might have been admitting something to himself rather than the crowd. That was the first crack in the script they'd written for me. His words slid along the line like thawing ice. They didn't know me. None of them had been there the night the convoy burned, or the time the tower went dark and someone had to hold a line until the medevac could cut through. They didn't know why my hands remembered certain angles, or why my breath came down to a fraction of a second when the world tilted. What they saw was one shot. One happenstance, maybe. But whoever leaned their head forward and squinted at the paper saw the center, the tiny, stubborn black hole where everything had gone. That, more than my silence, was what made them quiet. Afterward, there were questions that didn't need to be asked out loud. The colonel who had laughed the loudest cleared his throat and asked where my training was logged, which unit I'd been attached to, who had signed off on my qualification. I watched his mouth move and felt an old, private ledger of names and dates click shut behind my teeth. There are things you explain in full only once. I had no intention of starting that sentence here. They wanted a name to pin their new understanding to. I gave them none. I only rested the rifle, wiped my hands, and let the wind smooth out the ripples they'd made. The silence kept its shape around us like a held breath. And I listened, because after a shot like that, everyone listens. I didn't wait for permission to leave the line. After a beat too long, the range sergeant gave a stiff nod, then waved the next recruit forward. But I could still feel the eyes on my back, following me like dogs off leash. I moved past the gear table and unclipped my ear protection, letting it hang against my collarbone. The air outside the muffs felt thin, as if the silence from before had soaked into the day itself. Someone muttered, "No way, that was luck," but no one answered. The barracks were a quarter-mile down the gravel track, past the worn flagpole and the fenced motor pool. I walked slowly, letting the quiet pull the moment out like taffy. My boots traced the same worn lines in the dirt, but everything felt shifted, just slightly, like I'd cracked something open. In the mess later, the usual dull rhythm of trays, boots, and jokes returned, but with a strange undertone. A few heads turned too quickly when I walked in, then turned away even faster. No one spoke directly to me. That suited me fine. I sat at a corner table with my back to the wall. That wasn't habit. It was training. There's a difference. Across the room, the instructor who had said, "Good grouping," sat with his usual crew. I didn't know his name yet, but I'd learned to clock the way people moved in relation to power. He was the kind that didn't talk to make noise. He waited until his words mattered. I respected that. From the corner of his eye, he looked at me once, briefly, like someone checking a compass heading. "Where do you learn to shoot like that?" someone asked finally. A younger guy, maybe 20, full of that edge that comes from trying to prove you belong in a place you're not yet sure wants you. I looked up slowly. "My father taught me," I said. It wasn't a lie. He did teach me, before he left. Before the war swallowed him and left nothing behind but a citation, a folded flag, and a wall of silence my mother never dared lean against. "Military." "No," I said. "He ran a repair shop. But he knew rifles." That answer satisfied nobody, and yet stopped the questions. I watched the young guy retreat, not quite sure if he'd lost the upper hand or just misjudged the terrain. I didn't blame him. People always think skill has to be explained, that it must come from the right place, the right story. But the truth is, most of the best soldiers I knew carried things no one saw: grief, vengeance, duty, or a name carved into memory. That night, after lights out, I laid in the bottom bunk staring at the springs above me, listening to the breathing of strangers. Somewhere down the row, a guy snored like a diesel engine in neutral. Someone coughed. I stayed awake, because I remembered the last time silence had come after a shot. It was in Kandahar, in the space between the dust and the heat. I'd been on Overwatch duty with a two-man recon team. One of them, Mitch, was fresh out of academy, smart and too loud. The other, Jero, had eyes like steel cable. He never said much, just gave you a nod when something needed doing. That day, something went wrong. Radio silence. No extraction window. Intel failure, or worse, deliberate bait. We were supposed to be eyes only. But they came for us anyway, and when they did, it was me behind the scope. 3 bodies lay still when it was over. One of them wasn't breathing. 2 were. The silence then had been thick with disbelief. Disbelief that I had hit that shot at 1,200 yards, in wind and heat shimmer, with sand in the barrel and panic coiling around my neck. Disbelief from command when the after-action report showed that the team had survived only because the sniper stayed calm. I was never issued a commendation. I didn't want one. Sometimes recognition feels like a receipt you didn't ask for. Here, though, this new place, they didn't know that history. To them, I was a question without context. And after today, I'd become something worse than a liability. I was an anomaly. And anomalies don't last long in systems built on uniformity. The lights above buzzed faintly. I turned onto my side, closed my eyes, and whispered under my breath. One shot, one truth. That was what my father used to say. And tomorrow, I'd remind them again. The next morning, the clouds sat low like bruises on the horizon. Over the range, the wind felt different. Edgier, maybe, or just more expectant. The kind of day when your gear sticks to your back and your breath tastes metallic before noon. We formed up in staggered rows for the morning drills. Sergeant Decker stood front and center, his face carved in lines of irritation and fatigue. He hadn't looked at me yesterday after the shot. Not directly. Today he stared at me like I'd rewritten something on his clipboard with a pen I wasn't supposed to have. Marksman rotation, he barked. Pairs. My name landed with Reed. I knew him by reputation, second in our class, big shoulders, fast temper, steady hand. The sort of guy who'd been gunning for top spot until yesterday. When I stepped beside him, he didn't speak, just nodded once. That told me everything I needed. We moved in sync, collecting weapons, checking optics, locking in rounds. When I glanced at him during the final check, he met my eyes and said, "Let's see what you really are." The drills weren't basic anymore. They'd shifted tactics after my first shot. Now it was moving targets, shifting elevations, staggered timing. Things designed to break concentration. Designed to measure consistency. Target 1, the range officer called. Reed took the shot. Solid. Slight pull to the left. Target 2. I stepped forward. A high-speed silhouette popped from the brush line. 2 seconds, crosswind. I let it just a hair and squeezed. Clean hit. Silence again. Not the shocked kind this time. The calculating kind. We ran 5 more sequences. By the end, Reed had adjusted. He was good, damn good, but he knew I was better. Not by much, but enough. And in this world, enough was the difference between buried and breathing. As we packed down, he finally spoke. You served before, didn't you? I gave a half shrug. In a way. He snorted. That's a yes. You can call it whatever you like. He handed off his rifle and glanced over. They're going to test you. Hard. I know. Why not just tell them where you came from? Who trained you? Because that's not what matters, I said, my voice low. What matters is what I do now. He paused, then gave a slow nod. Fair. Later that day, I found my name posted outside the CO's office. A single sheet. Short list. 2 names under Advanced Evaluation, Live Scenario. Reed. And me. Below it, 48-hour readiness. Gear full. Extraction unknown. It was a proving op. A controlled but brutal simulation used to decide whether someone belonged in the elite forward reconnaissance unit. Normally, this came months down the line, if ever. You weren't asked. You were watched. Selected. This was something else. A fast track or a trap. I stood there a long moment, staring at the sheet. The corridor emptied around me. Somewhere behind the office door, Brass was watching through one-way glass. Testing me already, I whispered. They wanted to know if the shot was a fluke. If the silence it bought them was something they could rely on, or just lightning in a bottle. I smiled. Let them watch. Let them come. The evaluation brief came sealed in a plain envelope. No insignia, no header, just an order block typed in courier font like a bad secret. Recon 2 candidate evaluation. Duration, 48 hours. AO, Blackthorn Training Reserve. Objective, locate, observe, and extract marked intel package without compromise. At the bottom was a single line in red. This is not a graded exercise. Outcome determines future assignment. I slipped the paper back inside and folded the envelope in half. The barracks were almost silent at that hour, except for the hum of the air system and the dull percussion of rain starting to patter against the roof. Everyone else was either asleep or pretending to be. Across the room, Reed sat on his bunk checking his gear. He looked up when I entered. His expression was neutral, but his movements weren't. Too precise, too slow. He was thinking hard. You read yours? He asked. I nodded. Looks like they're sending us early. Looks like. He zipped his pack, the sound harsh in the quiet. I've heard stories about Blackthorn. They use it to break people. Put you in a maze of old training villages, bad comms, booby-trapped objectives. No instructors. Just you, the woods, and whatever ghost you drag in. I shrugged off my wet jacket. Ghosts I can handle. Yeah? You talk like someone who's been in deeper. I gave a faint smile. Maybe I have. Reed studied me a second longer, then dropped it. We left before dawn. The truck ride to Blackthorn took 2 hours through rain-washed forest roads. No one spoke. The driver wore no rank. He dropped us at a trailhead, handed us sealed radios, and drove off without a word. The rain had stopped, but mist clung to the tree-line like it didn't want to leave. Reed adjusted his pack. You take point or me? I'll take point. Fine by me. We moved into the tree-line. The ground was soft, covered in pine needles and moss. Blackthorn wasn't large, about 8 square miles, but it was built to feel endless. Old training shacks sat in pockets between ravines, the kind of abandoned mock-ups used for urban warfare drills back in the 90s. The place smelled like damp wood and rust. Our objective, according to the packet, was a sealed metal case with an encrypted beacon somewhere in the AO. We were to locate, confirm, and exfil with it without being compromised. No detail on what compromised meant. That usually meant enemy actors, role players from another unit, or sometimes hired contractors trained to make you sweat. By mid-morning, we'd crossed 2 ridges and found nothing but silence. Even the birds seemed to know this was a place for whispers, not noise. Reed crouched beside a fallen log, checking his map. Beacon's not pinging. Either the signal's dead or they want us blind. They always want you blind, I said. That's the test. You seem awfully sure about that. I've done this before, I said without thinking. He looked up sharply. You have. I didn't answer. He grinned without humor. You're a piece of work, you know that? We pressed on. The sun broke through once, weak and watery, then vanished again behind clouds. My boots left no sound on the pine needles. Every few steps, I scanned for movement, checking the tree line, listening. The habits you don't forget. Near noon, I stopped dead. What? Reed whispered. I pointed to a shallow depression near the edge of a clearing. In the damp soil, the heel mark of a boot. Too fresh. Not ours. Reed swore under his breath. Looks like we're not alone, I murmured. He raised his rifle slightly. You think they're tracking us? They're testing us, I said. And they're closer than they want us to know. The forest around us seemed to lean in. This wasn't just an evaluation anymore. It was a hunt. We dropped low and moved off trail, following the line of the ridge to get elevation without skyline exposure. The boot print had changed the game. Whoever was out here with us wasn't just another pair of evaluators with clipboards. These were hunters, and we'd just become the prey. Reed tapped his radio but kept it clipped. Any chance we make contact? Not unless we want to give ourselves away, I said. Signal would light us up like flares. We crept through the trees in silence, every movement deliberate. I led us around a long rise, where the brush thickened with undergrowth and broken stone. The terrain felt too natural to be a coincidence, like someone had shaped it to be a trap. That's when I saw it. A sliver of movement ahead. Just a flicker, like a shoulder shifting behind an old support beam near a shack half swallowed by moss. No noise, no voice. But the forest told the truth. I raised 2 fingers to Reed. He froze behind me. I moved to a crawl, flanking the structure from the left, while Reed took the other side. My heart wasn't racing. It never did at moments like this. The nerves had been burned out long ago. This was the part where everything became exact. I could hear the shallow breath of the wind through rotted wood. I could see the spot where an old window frame had collapsed. And I could feel the aim of someone watching that clearing, just waiting for one of us to make a sound. It was a textbook ambush, but I'd written better textbooks than theirs. I pulled a small mirror from my side pouch and angled it past the bush. A faint glint, low and narrow. A scope, tucked between floorboards. They'd buried into the shack's belly, not the upper floor. Smart. I slid back to Reed. Sniper. Shack basement. Watching the approach. At least 1. Maybe 2. You got the angle? I nodded. But I need 10 seconds of clean distraction. He grinned. Loud or clever? Clever, I said. But loud wouldn't hurt. Reed pulled out his decoy unit, a heat signature dummy used for advanced field training, and tossed it into the underbrush opposite the shack. He followed it with a sharp whistle, then ducked back behind the tree line. The effect was immediate. The shack's sniper fired once, straight through the brush, hitting only leaves and air. The moment he shot, I moved. I slid into prone, brought up my scope, adjusted 1 click left for the wind, and caught the shimmer of his second aim adjusting. I squeezed. My round cracked through the clearing. A splinter of wood burst from the shack's lower frame. Someone inside cursed loudly and scurried. Target's moving, Reed called, already on his feet. Let's flank him. We rushed in tandem, cutting angles, covering each other. The shack gave up its secrets fast. The sniper had bailed, leaving a spent round and a thermal scope rifle still warm. Left in a hurry. But that wasn't what stopped me cold. Taped beneath the table was a small metal box, sealed, black, no markings. I recognized the type. High-security mock intel package. The objective. I motioned Reed over. Found it. He swore. Already? That's too easy. I nodded grimly. Exactly. It's bait. Even as I said it, the forest erupted. Pops. Bursts. Suppressed fire. At least 3 shooters opened up from the ridge above. The shack exploded into chaos, splinters flying as bullets tore through wood. We hit the floor, crawling for cover. They were waiting. Reed shouted. Yeah, I said. And they just failed to learn their lesson from yesterday. I rolled, aimed up at the glint on the ridge, just visible between 2 trees, and fired 1 shot. The return fire stopped. The echo rang longer than it should have. Silence. Then, a voice over loudspeaker. Hold fire. End scenario. A distant chopper began to approach, its blades chopping the mist like a warning drum. Reed lowered his weapon slowly. What the hell just happened? I stood, dusting off the pine needles. We passed. Or we weren't supposed to, but they didn't account for me. Reed looked at the ridge, then at me. They said you were green, that you'd never seen live fire. They lied. We watched the chopper descend. A line of men stepped from the tree line near the ridge. All in black. Contractors. Evaluators. One of them was holding his arm, blood on his glove. The shot hadn't been a simulation. Neither was I. The flight back to base was wordless. Reed sat across from me, his eyes scanning the floor of the chopper like it held answers he hadn't learned to ask yet. The rotors thundered above us, a rhythmic thrum that barely covered the silence between us. Outside, the gray morning turned to fog-streaked afternoon. I kept my gaze on the horizon, not because I was avoiding him, but because I didn't want to watch his thoughts catch up. He'd seen it. All of it. The way I moved. The shot. The calm. The real package. The real wound. It hadn't been an act. And now he knew what they knew. When we landed, command was waiting. Not a full audience, just a pair of officers in pressed uniforms and unreadable faces. One of them, a colonel with ribbons on his chest and suspicion in his eyes, waved me over with a clipped gesture. Reed hesitated as I stepped forward, but the other officer held him back. The colonel led me into a small briefing room. No windows. One chair. He didn't sit. "We've reviewed your performance," he said, dropping a folder onto the table. It barely made a sound, but it landed with the weight of judgment. "There are questions about your history, about where you trained, and who authorized your deployment." I didn't answer. I wasn't going to volunteer anything. I'd learned that lesson a long time ago. "You're not in our system," he continued. "Not the way you should be. Your file says Civilian Integration Program, but there's no record of who ran it, or why a civilian would qualify for sniper operations training." He let the silence press in, trying to bait me with it. "You understand how that looks." I nodded. "I do." He leaned forward. "So tell me, who trained you?" "My father," I said again. It wasn't a lie. Not entirely. He slammed the folder closed. "You're going to need to do better than that." I looked him dead in the eye. "Then maybe you should ask better questions." He froze, not out of shock, but because he recognized what I'd just said for what it was. Not arrogance, but the cold steel of someone who didn't break the first time someone shouted. "I know who you are," he said after a beat. "Or rather, I know what's been redacted. I've seen the photos, the satellite footage. I know about the Kandahar incident, and the convoy near Marja. And I know the name Wraith 6 keeps coming up in after-action reports where no one was supposed to survive." I didn't blink. He stepped back, as if trying to see something beyond my skin. "That was you, wasn't it?" "I'm not here to confirm ghost stories," I said. "You sent me to the woods with a teammate and a fake objective. I brought him back alive. That should be enough." He studied me like a man who's seen a map of a place he thought didn't exist. After a long moment, he nodded. "You're being reassigned. Effective immediately." "To where?" "Forward Operations Group. Quiet team. No names, no patches. You'll get your orders in a sealed case." That was it. No congratulations. No medals. Just a door opening into the kind of work that never gets acknowledged. As I turned to leave, he added, "You're going to make people nervous." "I already do." Reed was waiting outside. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since Blackthorn. He didn't ask what happened in the briefing. Just gave me a long, measuring stare. "Was it worth it?" he asked finally. "Yes," I said, because they stopped laughing. 2 weeks later, I was on a transport jet headed west. No insignia, no destination listed. Just a black flight manifest and a sealed envelope I wasn't allowed to open until the plane crossed into restricted airspace. It felt like old times. The envelope held coordinates, a security code, and a line of orders stamped in red ink. Operational status, Ghost. Below that, primary designation, Guardian Asset, Wraith 6. Clearance reinstated. Field access unrestricted. So they were done pretending. I stared at the name like it belonged to someone else. I hadn't heard Wraith 6 spoken aloud in nearly 4 years. Not since the night we vanished into the desert on a mission that technically didn't exist. Not since everything went wrong, and I stayed behind. We were supposed to be 6. Only 3 of us walked out. The other 3? I carried their names in a notebook I never let anyone see. The new base was underground. No signs, no gates, just a concrete mouth half covered by rock and camo netting deep in a desert valley you'd only find if you knew where to look. They called it Station 0. Inside, the air was cool and sharp, filtered through machines that never shut off. The halls were painted in muted grays, the kind that keep people focused and quiet. I was greeted by a woman in her late 50s, silver hair in a tight braid, combat boots laced to perfection, and eyes like a hawk that never slept. "Call sign Athena," she said, shaking my hand. I'm your handler. You report only to me. Understood. She walked me past sealed doors and retinal scanners to a briefing room. Inside was a single holographic table, already displaying a map. Satellite overlays pulsed with red markers. Let me be clear, Athena said. We didn't pull you out of the shadows to train recruits or shoot paper targets. Good, I said. She tapped a coordinate cluster near the center of the map. We've got movement here. Rogue cell operating under former command protocols, but with unknown leadership. Sniper assets involved. We need someone who can counter that. Someone who doesn't need oversight to make a decision. She turned toward me. That's you. I nodded. And the partner? She hesitated. You'll be solo on this one, she said finally. Your old team's been scattered. I looked at the red dots on the map. You're sending me in cold? You're not cold, she said. You're the heater. That night, in my new bunk, I pulled out the worn notebook. Flipping past the pages marked with coordinates, names, call signs, I stopped at one entry. Jairo, last man through the breach. Mitch, laughed too much. Never missed a shot. Evie, my shadow. My sister, even if no blood. I added a new page. Read, didn't flinch when it mattered. And one more line, under my own name. They stopped laughing. I didn't need applause. I didn't need permission. I just needed the silence that comes after the first shot, and the chance to make it count again. The insertion came at night. No lights. No radio. Just me, the dark, and a drop zone carved into the edge of a forgotten plateau. The wind screamed against the side of the bird, but inside, everything was still. I checked my rifle again, an upgraded version of the M110, this one fitted with a thermal suppressor and AI-assisted rangefinder. It purred when I calibrated it, like it knew who was holding it. The pilot glanced back once, his voice crackling over the headset. 1 minute. I clipped in, dropped my goggles, and let the comms settle in. This wasn't just another op. It was the first time they were letting me run as Wraith 6 again. They weren't just testing me now. They were watching to see what would happen when the ghost came back to life. The landing was clean. Dust up to my knees. Silent boots. I moved off the LZ before the rotor wash even cleared. The target zone was 4 clicks northeast, a village abandoned a decade ago after a failed regime collapsed under its own lies. Now, intelligence said it housed something worse, a rogue network, ex-military, well-funded, and hunting tech assets across the region. And somewhere among them, a sniper. Athena had circled that part of the briefing with her finger, eyes unreadable. We believe she trained under one of our own programs. Possibly Shadow Ops. No current record. But the kills are precise. Consistent. What's the name? I'd asked. She's known only by what the chatter calls her. Athena had said. Vega. That name had made my spine stiffen. I knew Vega. We'd trained together. Years ago. Back when the program was experimental and too dangerous to have witnesses. She was the only one who could beat me on the range. Not by much, but enough to make it hurt. Until one day, she disappeared. Burned her tags. Cut her tether. Vanished. And now she was back. Hunting her own. I reached the ridge by 0300. The village below was ghostly in the thermal. Empty windows, crumbled walls, broken power lines swinging gently like pendulums of war. Through my scope, I watched movement. 3 figures on patrol, disciplined but slow. Ex-soldiers. Not mercenaries. I waited. At 0317, I spotted her. One frame, 15 meters above the rest, half-shadowed on the roof of a half-collapsed school. Holding a suppressed DMR, steady as a statue. Watching the same patrol I was. And then she moved, just her head, and looked directly into my lens. She knew. I rolled out of sight instinctively, counted to 5, then repositioned. No shot came. No alert. She wasn't here to kill me. Not yet. I reached the outer edge of the village an hour later, using collapsed drainage trenches and what was left of a forgotten irrigation system. My goal wasn't confrontation. Not tonight. The package Athena needed was in a buried comms crate beneath the school. Old NATO tech laced with encryption protocols no one was supposed to crack. I found it buried under rubble, exactly where the overlay said. But there was a note on it. Folded. Handwritten. Slid into a crack in the casing. Just 3 words. You're not ready. It wasn't a taunt. It was a warning. And it was signed. V. I exfilled before sunrise. Clean. No noise. But the mission had changed. Athena didn't speak when I handed her the note. She just nodded once and turned away. I knew what came next. We weren't dealing with an ordinary rogue. We were dealing with one of our own. And next time, there would be no warning. I spent the next 5 days in shadows. Tracking Vega wasn't like hunting a target. It was like chasing a ghost who knew all your tricks because she helped invent them. Every lead led to a dead end. Every clue was a message. No cameras. No heat trails. No comms. But signs appeared where they shouldn't have. Bullet casings in clean zones. Marks etched into door frames with code only someone from Blackwatch would recognize. She was everywhere and nowhere. Watching. Athena called me to the war room on the 6th day. The holograph table was dark this time. She stood beside it, arms crossed. She left a message at Outpost Sierra. Cut through the security grid like it was paper. Left one of our men unconscious. Didn't kill him. Another warning? I asked. Athena handed me a flash drive. No. A challenge. I plugged it in. Static burst across the screen before the image resolved. Vega, standing alone in an abandoned comms tower, her face half covered by a scarf. Her voice came through like frost. You were always faster. I was always better. Let's find out which matters now. No teams. No commands. Just you and me, Wraith. Then static again. The coordinates pulsed at the bottom. Athena's expression didn't change. This isn't sanctioned. You go in, you're alone. I nodded. I was alone long before this. The tower was a husk of metal wrapped in rust and silence. Set deep in a canyon carved by time and war. No birds. No wind. Just the groan of old steel and the ticking of ghosts. I moved through it like a memory. Checking angles. Watching for glint. Nothing. She didn't ambush me. Didn't trap the entrances. She wanted a duel. I found her on the top floor, crouched near a broken panel, her rifle beside her, untouched. She looked up. Her eyes hadn't changed. Still cold, still clear. But there was something behind them now. Regret, maybe. Or finality. You came, she said. You knew I would. I didn't leave the program because I broke, Vegas said. I left because I saw what it turned us into. You think this is about philosophy? I said, stepping closer. No. This is about truth, she said. The kind that only comes at the end of a barrel. She kicked her rifle toward me. I won't shoot first, she said. You get one shot. Just like you did that day on the range. Let's see if you still have it. I stared at the rifle. Then I picked it up. Checked it. Chambered. Vegas stood there, straight, calm. Waiting. I aimed. And I didn't shoot. Instead, I lowered the weapon. You already know the truth, I said. You just wanted to see if I did too. Vegas smiled just slightly. Took you long enough. From behind her, a second figure stepped out. Reed. Weapon raised. Not at me. At her. He looked at me for confirmation. I gave him none. This isn't your fight, I told him. She killed 3 of ours at Sierra. She didn't kill anyone, I said. She could have. But she didn't. He hesitated. And then, slowly, lowered his weapon. Vega nodded. You've both grown. Then she turned and walked into the darkness behind the tower panel. Gone. No sound. No trace. Just a fading echo of a shadow that once had a name. Back at Station 0, Athena said nothing when I filed my report. She just looked at me. You could have taken her. I could have, I said. But the point wasn't to win. No, she said. It was to prove you didn't have to. That night, I returned to the range. Same rifle. Same stance. Same wind. I fired one shot. Dead center. They weren't laughing anymore. And they never would again. Weeks passed. The world didn't change. The missions didn't stop. Names came and went, some with fanfare, others erased as if they'd never drawn breath. That was the cost of working in the shadows. The quieter you became, the more noise you made where it counted. But something had shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was in the way people stepped aside when I entered a room now. In the way Athena passed me folders without words. No briefing, no explanation. Just trust. Quiet, absolute trust. Reed, too, had changed. He trained differently now, more deliberate, more focused. We didn't talk about Blackthorn, or the tower, or Vega. But when we crossed paths, there was a look, a silent nod between ghosts who'd both been tested and walked out the other side. One night, he stopped me in the corridor. They're talking about you, he said. Let them. He smirked. You know what they're calling you now? I raised an eyebrow. Deadshot. I almost smiled. That's lazy. And inaccurate. You've made them rethink everything you know. I didn't answer. You made me rethink everything. That landed differently. You've earned more than silence, he added. You've earned a name. I looked past him, down the long corridor of quiet halls and sealed doors. My name had never been for them. Not the one they knew. The one that mattered had been whispered by those who saw what happened when I took the shot and lived to tell about it. 3 months later, I was back at the range. New recruits. Fresh uniforms. Some of them cocky. Some scared. All of them unaware of what waited beyond theory and training manuals. Athena had called me in. Just observe, she said. That's all. But halfway through the session, the sergeant waved me forward. Ma'am, would you care to demonstrate? I didn't say anything. I just stepped to the line. The laughter started again, soft this time. Nervous. One of the younger recruits elbowed another. I could hear it in their tone. She doesn't look like a shooter. Just like before. I chambered the round. I took the stance. I felt the weight of the rifle settle into me like memory. Then I took the shot. Crack. Dead center. No hesitation. No wobble. No mercy. The range went quiet. Somewhere behind me, the sergeant exhaled. One of the recruits stepped forward. Who is she? Athena's voice cut in from behind the glass. She's the reason we tell you not to assume anything about anyone. And then she added, that's Wraith 6. You'll remember the name the next time you're about to laugh. I stood, slung the rifle, and walked off the line without a word. Because I didn't need applause. I didn't need explanation. I had one shot. And after that, everyone fell silent. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.